The crystal chandeliers of Bella Vista cast dancing shadows across white tablecloths as Diana Whitmore adjusted her Hermes scarf. At 70 years old, she commanded respect wherever she went. Her real estate empire stretched across 15 states, and her name appeared on buildings from Chicago to Miami. Tonight's charity gala would add another million to her foundation's coffers, and she'd scheduled this dinner beforehand to finalize the details with her event coordinator. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. But Diana's perfectly organized evening shattered the moment her server approached the table. The young woman moved with practiced efficiency, balancing a tray while reciting the evening's specials. Her uniform was impeccable, her smile professional. Diana barely registered any of this because her eyes had locked onto something else entirely, a delicate gold locket resting against the server's collarbone. The room tilted. Diana's water glass slipped from her fingers, ice cubes scattering across expensive linen. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The server's voice seemed to come from underwater. Diana couldn't speak. She stared at that locket, her heart hammering against her ribs. It couldn't be. After 30 years, it simply couldn't be. The design was unmistakable, a lotus flower with 7 petals, each one containing a tiny sapphire. Diana had commissioned it herself from a jeweler in Amsterdam, spending 3 months perfecting every detail. Only 2 had ever been made. She wore one. The other had disappeared 3 decades ago along with her daughter. "Miss," Diana finally managed, her voice hoarse. "Your necklace. Where did you get it?" The server, her name tag read Kennedy, touched the locket reflexively, a protective gesture. "It's a family heirloom. Is there something wrong?" "Family?" Diana felt her carefully constructed composure crumbling. "What family?" Kennedy's expression shifted from concern to wariness. Other diners were starting to notice. Diana Whitmore didn't raise her voice. She didn't lose control. But right now, she was gripping the table's edge like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. "Ma'am, I should get my manager." "No, please." Diana stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. "Please, I need to know about that necklace. It's important. More important than you can imagine." The restaurant manager materialized, his smile professionally concerned. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything satisfactory?" Diana barely acknowledged him. Her entire being focused on Kennedy, on that impossible locket gleaming under the chandeliers. "I designed that necklace," Diana said, her voice breaking. "I had it made for my daughter 30 years ago. And you're wearing it." The manager's office was cramped compared to the restaurant's grandeur. Kennedy perched on the edge of a chair while Diana sat across from her, hands trembling despite her attempts at control. "Start from the beginning," Diana said. "Please." Kennedy's fingers closed around the locket. She'd worn it every single day since she was old enough to remember. It was her only connection to a past she'd never known. "I was found in a church parking lot when I was 3 days old," Kennedy began. "This locket was pinned to my blanket. No note, no explanation. Just me and this necklace." Diana's breath caught. "The authorities tried to find my birth parents," Kennedy continued. "They ran missing persons reports, checked hospital records. Nothing. I became a ward of the state. Spent my childhood bouncing between foster homes in Illinois." "Illinois?" Diana whispered. "Not Georgia?" "No. Rockford, Illinois." "Why?" Diana pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She scrolled through photos until she found the one she'd carried for 3 decades. A young woman with warm brown skin and bright eyes, laughing at the camera. Around her neck hung an identical lotus locket. "Her name was Simone," Diana said, turning the screen toward Kennedy. "My daughter. She was 22 when this was taken. She disappeared 3 months later." Kennedy stared at the photo. The woman looked vibrant and alive, frozen in a moment of pure joy. "What happened to her?" "I don't know." The admission cost Diana something. She'd been traveling, taking photographs for her portfolio. She called me from somewhere in the Midwest, said she'd met someone special. That was the last time I heard her voice. When she didn't come home, I hired investigators. Police. Private security. We searched for years. The pain in Diana's voice was raw despite the decades that had passed. They found her car abandoned outside Rockford 3 months after she vanished. Empty except for her camera bag. No signs of violence. No body. No leads. It was like she'd evaporated. Kennedy's mind raced. The timeline matched. The location matched. But it seemed impossible. You think I'm her daughter? I think someone took you from her, Diana said fiercely. I think something terrible happened, and somehow you survived. And that locket, the one piece of evidence that could have identified you, ended up in Illinois while everyone was searching Georgia. But why wouldn't she have told you she was pregnant? Diana's expression crumpled. Because I'd been horrible to her. She'd told me about this man she'd met, someone I thought was completely wrong for her. We fought. I said terrible things about her throwing away her future. She left angry, and I was too stubborn to call and apologize. Tears rolled down Diana's carefully made-up face. If she was pregnant, she probably thought I'd judge her even more harshly. I've spent 30 years hating myself for that last conversation. Kennedy sat frozen. She'd created so many stories about her origins over the years. A teenage mother who couldn't cope. Parents too poor to care for her. Even darker scenarios involving abandonment and rejection. But this? A grandmother who'd been searching all along? We need proof, Kennedy said, forcing herself to think logically. DNA tests. Yes, Diana agreed immediately. I'll have my doctor arrange everything tonight. But Kennedy, regardless of what the tests show, I need you to know something. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. If you are Simone's daughter, my granddaughter, then someone stole 30 years from us. Someone took a baby from a young mother and left that baby to die in a parking lot. Someone is responsible for this. The words hung heavy in the small office. And when we find out who, Diana continued, her voice hard as diamonds, they will answer for it. The DNA results came back in 48 hours. Diana had paid a small fortune for the rush processing, and when her doctor called with the results, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. 99.9% probability. Kennedy was her granddaughter. Diana sat alone in her penthouse, staring at the Chicago skyline, and wept. Not the careful, controlled tears she'd allowed herself at Simone's memorial service. These were decades of grief, rage, and relief pouring out all at once. She'd found her granddaughter. But Simone was still gone. The next morning, Diana called her head of security. Marcus Chen had worked for her for 15 years, former FBI with connections throughout law enforcement. If anyone could unravel a 30-year-old mystery, it was him. I need to know everything, Diana told him, sliding a folder across her desk. What happened to my daughter? How Kennedy ended up abandoned in Illinois. Every detail, no matter how small. Marcus reviewed the file, his expression grim. Mrs. Whitmore, the trail is cold. Witnesses will have died or forgotten. Records might not exist anymore. I don't care if you have to dig up the past with your bare hands. Find out what happened. Within a week, Marcus's team had assembled in Diana's private conference room. They'd pulled hospital records, police reports, even weather data from 30 years ago. The picture they painted was fragmentary but chilling. Your daughter checked into a motel outside Rockford on March 15th, Marcus reported. She paid cash, used her real name. The clerk remembers her because she seemed nervous, kept looking over her shoulder. Diana absorbed this. Was someone following her? Possibly. 2 days later, the motel owner found her room empty. Bed hadn't been slept in. Personal belongings were gone except for a jacket she'd left in the closet. And 3 days after that, a newborn was discovered in that church parking lot. Female infant, approximately 3 days old, suffering from exposure and dehydration. The locket was her only identification. Diana felt sick. My granddaughter was out there for 3 days? The doctors said she was lucky to survive, Marcus said gently. Another few hours and the exposure would have killed her. Kennedy, who'd insisted on being present for this meeting, spoke up. Why would someone leave a baby in a parking lot? If they wanted to abandon me, there were safe havens. Hospitals. Fire stations. Because whoever left you didn't want you identified, Marcus said. They stripped away everything except that locket, probably didn't realize its significance. They wanted you lost in the system. But why? Diana demanded. What possible motive? She stopped. A terrible suspicion blooming in her mind. Pull Simone's trust fund documents, she ordered. And the will I had drawn up back then. Marcus nodded, already understanding where her thoughts had gone. The documents told a damning story. As Diana's only child, Simone had been set to inherit everything, a fortune worth hundreds of millions even 30 years ago. But Simone's will, created when she turned 21, had specified that if she died, her assets would transfer to any children she might have. And if she had no children, everything would go to Diana's brother, Thomas. Where's Thomas now? Kennedy asked. Diana's expression hardened. He died 5 years ago. Liver failure from drinking. He spent the last decade of his life burning through the inheritance he got when I believed Simone had died childless. He knew, Kennedy breathed. He knew about me. We don't know that for certain, Marcus began. Don't we? Diana's voice could have cut glass. Thomas had gambling debts back then. Massive ones. He came to me asking for help months before Simone disappeared. I refused, told him to handle his own problems. She stood, pacing to the windows overlooking the city. If Simone died without a known heir, he'd inherit. But if there was a grandchild, even an infant, that baby would get everything. Thomas would have had motive to make sure that baby disappeared. The room fell silent. I need proof, Diana said finally. Not speculation. Proof. Marcus's investigation kicked into high gear. He tracked down the motel clerk who'd checked Simone in, an elderly woman now living in a nursing home. Her memory was spotty, but she remembered the pretty young photographer who'd seemed scared. She asked if we had rooms in the back, away from the road, the woman recalled. Said she needed somewhere quiet to rest. She was pregnant, I could tell, though she didn't mention it. Did anyone else ask about her? Marcus pressed. Funny you should ask. A man came around the next day. Wanted to know if we'd seen a black woman, early 20s. I told him no, didn't like his energy. Can you describe him? The woman's description was vague, but one detail stood out. The man had a distinctive scar across his left hand, like he'd been burned. Marcus ran that detail through databases, cross-referenced with people who'd known Thomas Whitmore, and found a match. Vincent Russo, former Army, dishonorable discharge, had worked as Thomas's assistant during the time period in question. Most notably, he had a burn scar from a childhood accident. Vincent was now deceased, killed in a bar fight 10 years ago. But his widow was very much alive. Diana paid Vincent Russo's widow $20,000 for a conversation. The woman, worn down by decades of hard living, took the money and talked. Vince did jobs for Thomas Whitmore, she said, chain-smoking in her trailer home. Never told me details, but he came back from one of them real shaken up. That was 1995, spring I think. What did he say happened? Diana asked, her voice calm despite the fury churning inside her. Said he'd done something he couldn't take back. Kept having nightmares about a girl and a baby. Started drinking heavier. I asked him what was going on, and he hit me for the first time. Kennedy, sitting beside Diana, flinched. He told me once, when he was drunk, the woman continued. Said Thomas hired him to handle a problem. Some girl who'd gotten pregnant and was gonna mess up an inheritance. Vince found her at that motel, waited until she'd given birth. Diana's nails dug into the armrest of her chair. He took the baby, dumped it somewhere he thought no one would look. And the mother, the woman's voice dropped. He said she didn't survive. The words landed like bombs. Where? Kennedy's voice cracked. Where is she? He never said exactly, but he kept talking about the river. How the current was strong that time of year. How things got swept away and never came back. Diana stood abruptly, walking outside before she could hear more. Kennedy found her minutes later, standing in the weak sunlight, tears streaming silently down her face. "We'll find her," Kennedy said. "We'll bring her home." The Rock River runs through Illinois with deceptive calm. 30 years ago, it would have been cold and swift with spring snowmelt, perfect for erasing evidence. Diana hired forensic teams, brought in cadaver dogs, consulted with experts in water recovery. The search focused on areas within 10 miles of the motel where Simone had stayed. It took 3 weeks. The remains were found caught in a tangle of roots beneath an old bridge, weighted down with chains that had rusted but held. The medical examiner confirmed the approximate age and time of death matched. Dental records provided final confirmation. Simone Whitmore had been 22 years old. She'd died within days of giving birth, murdered and thrown into a river because she'd had the misfortune of being pregnant when it inconvenienced her uncle's financial plans. Diana stood at the riverbank where her daughter had been found, Kennedy beside her. Neither woman spoke. There were no words adequate for this moment. Finally, Diana said, "He took everything from us. Thomas is dead and Vincent is dead, but that doesn't balance the scales. What do you want to do?" Kennedy asked. Diana turned to her, and for the first time, Kennedy saw not a grieving mother or a powerful businesswoman, but someone who'd been carrying an impossible weight for 30 years and was finally ready to set it down. "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I want to use every resource I have to protect vulnerable people. And I want my daughter's story told, so everyone knows what greed and cruelty can destroy." Diana went public with everything. The story exploded across national news. The missing heiress, the murdered photographer, the baby left to die, the uncle who'd orchestrated it all for inheritance money he'd eventually squandered. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Lawmakers scrambled to address gaps in missing persons investigations. Cold case units received new funding. Organizations supporting foster children saw donations surge. But Diana's most significant action was personal. She established the Simone Whitmore Foundation with an initial endowment of $100 million. Its mission, supporting foster children, funding cold case investigations, and providing resources for families searching for missing loved ones. Kennedy became the foundation's director. She left her waitressing job, though the restaurant had offered her a management position, and threw herself into the work. She understood better than anyone what it meant to grow up without answers, without family, without anyone fighting for you. "Every child we help find a permanent home," Kennedy said at the foundation's launch event, "is a victory. Every cold case we help solve brings closure to a family that's been suffering. This is how we honor Simone. This is how we turn tragedy into something meaningful." Diana, standing beside her granddaughter, added, "My daughter was a photographer who saw beauty in the world. She would have been a wonderful mother. She should have had the chance to raise her daughter, to see her grow into this remarkable woman. Instead, greed stole that from all of us." Her voice strengthened. But Kennedy survived. Against impossible odds, she survived. And together, we're going to make sure other families don't suffer what we did. We're going to shine light into dark places and demand accountability. That's Simone's legacy. Simone was buried in a family plot overlooking Lake Michigan. The service was private, attended only by Diana, Kennedy, and a few close friends. Diana had waited 30 years to say goodbye to her daughter properly. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," Diana whispered, placing a hand on the casket. "I'm sorry for our fight. I'm sorry you died alone and scared. But I found her, baby. I found Kennedy. And she's extraordinary. You would be so proud." Kennedy stood beside her grandmother, tears flowing freely. She'd never known her mother, but she grieved for all the moments they'd been denied. Birthday celebrations. First days of school. Graduations. All the ordinary milestones stolen by one man's greed. After the burial, Diana and Kennedy drove to the church where Kennedy had been found. It was still there, weathered but standing. The parking lot looked smaller than Kennedy remembered from photographs. "This is where someone left me to die," Kennedy said, staring at the cracked pavement. "But it's also where someone found me. A janitor coming in early for Sunday service. He heard me crying and called 911. Do you know his name? Marcus tracked him down. His name was Robert Walsh. He died 4 years ago. Diana made a note on her phone. We'll name one of the Foundation's programs after him. The Robert Walsh Life-Saving Fund. For people who act when it matters most. Kennedy smiled through her tears. Mom would have liked that. It was the first time she'd used that word, Mom, in reference to Simone. Diana heard it and had to look away, overcome. They stood together in the parking lot where Kennedy's life had nearly ended and somehow, miraculously, continued. I used to imagine my birth mother was someone who had no choice, Kennedy said softly. I created stories where she loved me but circumstances were impossible. I never imagined she'd been murdered for trying to give me life. She fought for you, Diana said fiercely. She kept you safe for 3 days after giving birth alone in a motel room. She put that locket on you so you'd have something of hers. She fought, Kennedy. Never doubt that. The foundation grew rapidly. Within a year, it had offices in 12 states. Within 2 years, it had helped solve 37 cold cases and placed over 500 foster children in permanent homes. Kennedy discovered she had her mother's eye for seeing beauty in brokenness. She commissioned photographers to document the foundation's work, children reuniting with families, cold cases finding resolution, communities coming together. Each photograph told a story of resilience. Diana, meanwhile, found herself transformed by grandmother. The ice-cold businesswoman who'd ruled her empire with an iron fist became someone different. She still ran her companies effectively, but she delegated more. Spent time with Kennedy. Allowed herself to feel joy again. They developed rituals. Sunday brunch at Diana's penthouse. Monthly visits to Simone's grave. Annual gala fundraisers for the foundation where they told Simone's story and Kennedy's survival to audiences who donated millions. But the most important ritual was the simplest. Every evening, Kennedy would text her grandmother, "Made it home safe." And Diana would respond, "See you tomorrow, sweetheart." 30 years of missed conversations, compressed into daily check-ins that meant everything. 2 years after their reunion, Kennedy was having the locket professionally cleaned when the jeweler made a discovery. "There's something inside," he said, showing her under magnification. "A seam I almost missed. This locket opens." Kennedy's heart raced. She'd worn this locket for 3 decades without realizing it held a hidden compartment. The jeweler carefully pried it open. Inside was a tiny rolled piece of paper, yellowed with age but still legible. Kennedy unrolled it with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, written in what looked like eyeliner. "Her name is Kennedy Rose. She has her father's smile. I love her more than anything. If you find her, please tell her I fought to keep her. Please tell her she was wanted. Please tell her she was loved. Simone." Kennedy collapsed into a chair, clutching the note. Her mother had known. Known she was in danger. Known she might not survive. And she'd left this message hoping against hope that someday, somehow, her daughter would find it. Diana wept when Kennedy showed her the note that evening. She had the paper professionally preserved and framed, hanging it in Kennedy's office at the foundation headquarters. "She knew your name," Diana whispered. "She named you before anyone else could. You were Kennedy Rose from the moment you were born." Kennedy traced the words with her finger. Her entire life, she'd been Kennedy, picked by the social worker who'd processed her case. She'd never known it was actually the name her mother had chosen. "Kennedy Rose Whitmore," Diana said. "That's your full name. That's who you've always been." One question remained unanswered. Who was Kennedy's father? The note mentioned him. She has her father's smile, but Simone had never told Diana his identity. The investigators had found no leads, no names in Simone's personal effects. Kennedy wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her father had either been part of the plot or had abandoned Simone when she needed him most. Neither option was appealing. But then Marcus made a breakthrough. He'd been reviewing Simone's recovered belongings, her camera bag found in the abandoned car. Inside was a roll of undeveloped film that had been logged as evidence but never processed. "Technology's advanced," Marcus explained. "We can develop this now without destroying it." The photographs showed a young man. Black, early 20s, laughing in several shots. In others, he was looking at the camera, looking at Simone with unmistakable tenderness. The final photo showed him and Simone together, his hand on her pregnant belly, both of them smiling. "That's my father," Kennedy breathed. Marcus had already started facial recognition searches. The man's name was David Morrison. He'd been a grad student at Northwestern University when he and Simone met, and he'd reported her missing when she vanished. David Morrison was now 52 years old. He'd become a high school teacher in Seattle, never married, no children. Marcus found him grading papers in his classroom after hours. "I never stopped looking for her," were David's first words when Marcus explained why he'd come. "The police said she probably ran off. Didn't want to be found. But I knew Simone. She wouldn't have just disappeared. And she wouldn't have left without telling me about the baby." "You knew she was pregnant?" "Of course I knew. We were planning to get married. She was going to tell her mother after the baby came, hoping Diana would be more accepting once she met her grandchild." His voice broke. "What happened to them?" Marcus told him everything. David listened in silence, tears running down his face, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. "She's alive," he finally whispered. "Kennedy is alive? And she'd like to meet you if you're willing." Kennedy and David met at a coffee shop in Seattle. Diana had offered to come, but Kennedy wanted this first meeting to be private. She saw him immediately when she walked in, saw her own eyes looking back at her from a stranger's face, saw the smile her mother had mentioned in that note. David stood when she approached, his entire body shaking. "Kennedy?" "Hi," she managed. "I guess I'm your daughter." They both laughed through tears. Then David pulled out his wallet and showed her a photo, young Simone, pregnant and radiant. "I've carried this for 30 years, he said, "hoping someday I'd find out what happened to her. I never imagined." He couldn't finish. They talked for 4 hours. David told her about meeting Simone in a coffee shop not unlike this one. How they'd bonded over photography and social justice. How she'd been the most passionate person he'd ever met, determined to document the world's beauty and injustice in equal measure. She wanted to expose corruption, David said. Had been researching some financial scandal involving her family's company. "I thought it was dangerous, but she said it was important. I wonder if that's connected to what happened." Kennedy made a note to have Marcus investigate. There might be more to this story than Thomas's simple greed. "Why didn't you keep looking?" Kennedy asked. "After the police stopped?" "I did," David said quietly. "For years. I hired private investigators with money I didn't have. I tracked every lead. But the trail went cold. Eventually, people told me I needed to move on. But I never really did. I teach photography to my students because of her. I've been living half a life, waiting for answers I thought would never come." Kennedy reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm here now. We both lost her, but we found each other." Integrating David into their lives was surprisingly natural. He and Diana met with initial wariness. She blamed herself for driving Simone away, and he'd spent years angry at the family that hadn't protected her. But grief and love for Kennedy bridged the gap. David moved to Chicago, started teaching at an inner-city school and volunteering with the foundation, running photography workshops for foster children. His students learned to see the world the way Simone had, with compassion and curiosity. Kennedy now had both a grandmother and a father. The family she dreamed about while growing up in foster care had materialized, albeit in a form she could never have imagined. They celebrated their first Thanksgiving together in Diana's penthouse. Diana, Kennedy, David, and Marcus, who'd become family through proximity and shared purpose. "I want to propose a toast," Diana said, raising her glass. "To Simone, who gave us Kennedy. To Kennedy, who survived against all odds. And to everyone at this table who refused to give up on finding truth and justice. And to second chances," Kennedy added. "For all of us." Marcus's investigation into Simone's research revealed something stunning. She'd been documenting embezzlement at Whitmore Industries, perpetrated by Thomas. She'd collected evidence, planned to expose him, and that's likely what had triggered his murderous desperation. The evidence was still there, buried in archived files. Diana used it to posthumously clear Thomas's name from everything he'd touched in her company, donating the equivalent of his theft to the foundation. But more importantly, 3 of Thomas's co-conspirators were still alive. They'd helped him cover up the embezzlement and had profited from it over the years. Diana sued them civilly and pushed for criminal charges. 2 were convicted of fraud and conspiracy. The 3rd took a plea deal and forfeited everything, dying broke and disgraced. Is it enough? Kennedy asked after the final verdict came down. Diana considered this. No. Nothing will bring Simone back or give us those 30 years. But it's accountability. It's proof that rich people don't get away with murder just because time passes. That's worth something. On the 5th anniversary of finding Kennedy, the foundation released a documentary about their story. It included the photos Simone had taken, David's memories, Kennedy's experience in foster care, and the investigation that brought everything to light. But it also profiled other families the foundation had helped. The cold case solved after 20 years. The foster child who found permanent parents. The trafficking victim rescued and reunited with her family. Simone's story isn't unique, Kennedy said in the final interview. Thousands of people go missing every year. Thousands of children end up in the system without anyone fighting for them. What makes our story different is that we had resources to search for truth. Not everyone does. That's why the foundation exists, Diana added. To be the voice for people who can't fight their own battles. To be the resources someone needs when everything seems hopeless. The documentary won awards and generated millions in donations. But more importantly, it inspired other families to keep searching, to never give up, to believe that answers were possible even after decades. Kennedy was offered a position running a major national nonprofit focused on foster care reform. The salary was triple what the foundation paid her, and the platform would be enormous. She turned it down. The Simone Whitmore Foundation is personal, she explained to Diana. Every child we help is a version of me who gets a better outcome. Every family we reunite is us, getting the ending we deserved. I can't walk away from that. Diana, who'd been secretly hoping Kennedy would refuse the offer, felt relief wash over her. You're sure? This is your life, your career. I don't want you staying because of obligation. It's not obligation. It's purpose. Kennedy smiled. Mom spent her life trying to expose injustice through photography. I'm continuing that work, just in a different form. How could I walk away from that? David proposed creating a scholarship in Simone's name for foster youth pursuing photography. The foundation enthusiastically agreed, and the Simone Whitmore Memorial Scholarship launched with full funding for 10 students annually. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl from Kennedy's old foster care system. At the awards ceremony, she showed her portfolio, stark, beautiful images of life in group homes, of children waiting for families, of resilience in the face of abandonment. Your mother would be proud, the girl told Kennedy shyly. Kennedy hugged her tight. She'd be proud of you. Keep telling these stories. Keep making people see. Watching from the audience, David wiped his eyes. Diana squeezed his hand. We're doing good work, Diana whispered. Simone would approve, David agreed. On what would have been Simone's 52nd birthday, Kennedy wrote her a letter. She read it aloud at her mother's grave with Diana and David present. Dear Mom, I'm 30 years old now. The same age you were when you died. I have your passion for justice and Dad's smile. I have grandmother's determination and your eye for beauty. I wish I'd known you. I wish you'd been there for my first day of school, my graduation, all the ordinary moments we were denied. I wish I could show you the foundation and introduce you to the hundreds of children we've helped. But I carry you with me every day. In the locket you gave me. In the work I do. In the family we've built from the ashes of tragedy. You fought for me. You named me. You loved me. That's more than many children in foster care ever get. And I've spent my life making sure that changes. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. I hope you know your death wasn't meaningless. It sparked something that's changed thousands of lives. Thank you for giving me life. Thank you for the 3 days you kept me safe. Thank you for that note in the locket. Those words sustained me when I finally found them. I'm living the life you would have wanted from me. I'm fighting the battles you would have fought. I'm loving the family you created. We've got it from here. Love always, Kennedy Rose Whitmore. 10 years after Diana first saw that locket, the foundation opened its 100th office. Kennedy stood at the podium during the opening ceremony, now a nationally recognized advocate for foster care reform and cold case resolution. We've helped reunite over 2,000 families, Kennedy announced. We've solved 147 cold cases. We've placed 8,000 children in permanent homes. And we're just getting started. Diana, now 80, watched from the front row. She'd stepped down as CEO of Whitmore Industries to focus entirely on the foundation and her family. Her legacy would be measured not in buildings or business deals, but in lives changed and families restored. David, teaching photography to the next generation, had mentored dozens of students who went on to document social justice issues. Simone's vision carried forward through the people who loved her. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Kennedy. She was 25, carrying a portfolio. "You helped place me with my adoptive family when I was 15, she said. "I was aging out of the system. Thought I'd end up on the streets. But your foundation advocated for me, found me a family who wanted a teenager. They supported me through college. I'm a social worker now because of what you did." Kennedy hugged her. "You did the work. We just opened the door. Will you look at my portfolio? I want to work for the foundation." The portfolio showed powerful images of foster children, group homes, the complex emotions of kids trapped in the system. Kennedy saw her mother's influence in every frame. "You're hired," Kennedy said. "When can you start?" That evening, the family gathered at Diana's penthouse for their weekly dinner. It had been a decade of these dinners, of building traditions and healing wounds. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.